Hi, my name is Stephanie, and today I will be talking about what social workers can learn from policy practice and advocacy in the 19th century. We'll focus on four reformers: Dorothea Dix, Elizabeth Stanton, Frederick Douglass, and Eugene Debs, who challenged injustice in their time and how their work continues to shape social policy today. In the 19th century, reformers worked against widespread racism, sexism, and classism, but they still managed to push forward real change. They each focused on different social problems: mental health, women's rights, abolition of slavery, and labor rights, but together they reveal how advocacy can influence policy. Eugene Debs was one of the most influential labor leaders and socialist voices in American history. He started as a railroad worker and helped form the American Railway Union. During the Pullman strike of 1894, Debs and the Union supported workers protesting wage cuts. The strike shut down rail traffic across the country until federal troops violently suppressed it. Debs was imprisoned, but prison transformed him. Behind bars, he studied socialism and left prison with a new vision: fighting for equality, justice, and dignity for all workers. He helped found the Socialist Party of America and ran for president 5 times. Most famously, in 1920, he campaigned from prison after being jailed for speaking out against World War I and still received nearly a million votes. Debs fought for workers' rights, public ownership of industries, women's suffrage, and civil liberties. Though he never won office, his words inspired generations of activists and remind us that structural change, not moral blame, is how we address inequality. Dorothea Dix is remembered for her fight to reform mental health care. Her compassion came partially from her own difficult childhood with an abusive alcoholic father. In 1841, she began investigating conditions in prisons and poorhouses where people with mental illness were kept. She found people chained, beaten, left naked, and locked in cages. Outraged, she spent 40 years pushing for reform. Dix's advocacy helped create 32 mental hospitals, 15 schools for people with intellectual disabilities, and a school for the blind, and training programs for nurses. But even today, her work remains unfinished. Nearly half of U.S. inmates have mental health issues, and treatment is still inadequate. Elizabeth Stanton. Elizabeth Stanton was a leading voice for women's rights. Influenced by the reform spirit of the Second Great Awakening, she challenged old institutions like slavery, prisons, and traditional roles for women. In 1848, she helped organize the first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls, New York, where she drafted the Declaration of Sentiments, modeled after the Declaration of Independence. It boldly declared that all men and women are created equal. It called for equal rights in education, property, work, and, most controversially, the right to vote. Stanton was the thinker and writer of the movement, while Susan B. Anthony focused on organizing. Together, they founded the National Women's Suffrage Association and worked for decades toward a constitutional amendment for women's voting rights. Frederick Douglass was one of the most important leaders for African American civil rights. After escaping slavery in 1838, he became a national voice for abolition. Douglass's speeches described the cruelty of slavery with unmatched eloquence, and his autobiography became one of the most influential accounts of slavery ever published. But he didn't stop there. He also championed women's rights, attending the Seneca Falls Convention and working alongside Stanton and Anthony. During the Civil War, Douglass advised President Abraham Lincoln, urging him to allow black soldiers to fight for the Union. Two of Douglass's own sons enlisted. His life embodied both resilience and advocacy for justice across multiple movements. One lesson from this era is that many early social policies failed because they were rooted in moral judgment instead of evidence. Dorothea Dix pushed back against the idea that people with mental illness were morally weak, arguing they needed hospitals, not prisons. Eugene Debs fought the idea that poverty and substance use were personal failings, he showed how labor exploitation was the real issue. Elizabeth Stanton challenged a system that blamed women for poverty while denying them independence and rights. Douglass exposed how racism and slavery created homelessness and poverty, not individual flaws. These reformers taught us that lasting change comes from the addressing structural causes, not blaming individuals. Some of their victories still shape us today. The abolition of slavery, the expansion of suffrage, public education, and the idea of social services. But we also continue to wrestle with inequities rooted in 19th century oppression against women, African Americans, Native Americans, and immigrants. So, in conclusion, what can social workers learn today? First, morality alone is not enough. Evidence based strategies are essential. Grassroots empowerment works. Change begins in communities. Persistence matters, like Debs. Even unpopular positions can influence future reforms. And finally, understanding history helps us connect clients to both formal systems and community resources. The reformers of the 19th century show us that social problems persist, but advocacy, empowerment, and systemic reform can create meaningful change. As social workers, we carry their legacy forward by promoting justice, dignity, and equity for all people.